Hello, bookworms. This is Abby.
And this is Mary.
And welcome to another episode of Eat the Bookworm, where we discuss books we are currently reading as well as book-related content. So, Mary, what are you reading currently?
I'm reading 3 different books because I'm a mad woman. I think 3, might be 4. So I have a book that I keep by my bed that I read at night. So that my paperback book, because my phone hurts my eyes, is The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley. I think I've seen a lot of advertisements recently for this book, and it might just be because I Googled it before I bought it. And so they might have just thrown it in my feed. And I bought it at Walmart, so I didn't buy it through Amazon or like an online marketplace. So I think my phone thinks I'm still considering purchasing it. But I really like it so far. It's about a girl who had gotten into some trouble in Europe. She lives in England. Her brother lives in Paris. And when she goes to visit her brother, she starts noticing things around his apartment because he's not there. She starts going through his stuff, looking for him. And she starts finding clues to like the secret life he was living in Paris. So I'm very interested. As I told my husband, I'm declaring myself lead detective on this case. I'm gonna figure out what's going on.
You're Agatha Christieing it?
Yes, I'm Agatha Christieing it. I'm gonna find out.
What's that other detective, Nancy Drew?
Oh yeah, I'm like a secret Nancy Drew. I love these kind of books because I feel like I'm like an outsider, like helping her figure out what's going on, even though we're not talking.
But you're there. There.
I'm there. I'm supporting her.
Yeah.
So then on my phone, I am reading White Bird in a Blizzard. Let me see. The author's name is Laura Kaczynski. I think I'm saying that right.
Laura, I honestly don't know.
I'll just spell it. Kaczynske. I picked up this book on my Kindle because I also have books coming out of every orifice. I picked this one up because I actually saw a trailer for the movie on HBO Max. And before I watch the movie, I have the tendency to want to read the book first. So I picked this one up. I just started reading it last night because it was raining real nasty at our house and the power went out for a little bit. So I couldn't do the book on my phone. I couldn't do my paper books. I started doing the one on my phone. And it's been interesting so far, but I want to caution people. She has a very long, drawn out way of writing. And she was very repetitive, and it's not in a very like sequential order. So she goes back and forth from current time to back, like flashbacks and things like that. And she doesn't really give you a warning. So if you're going to read it, pay very close attention to it. And then on my Audible, I'm actually listening to Terminus.
It's an ebook?
I'm listening to it on my Audible. So while I'm working, it's Peter Clines is the author.
Oh, okay. I think I pulled it up.
Terminus, you found it?
Yeah.
I just started listening to it because I'm actually listening to that specifically for my other book club. My actual work book club.
Oh, that's still going on?
Yes, they actually read the books.
Oh, nice.
So I've still been doing that with them, but I just started it. So I wanted to look up the summary to give you guys an idea of what it's about. Okay. So this one is actually the 4th book in a series. And we've actually read the other books. So we read 14 and we read The Fold. We skipped the 3rd book in the series because we had someone read ahead of us and she said it wasn't worth it. But everybody who read the 3rd or the 4th book before loved it. So now we're on to Terminus in that series. So I'll just leave it at that.
Oh, okay.
So what are you reading?
So I'm not reading 3 books like someone over here. I'm reading 1. I'm trying to read more because after work, I'm very exhausted and I just honestly want to sit in bed and scroll through TikTok and Facebook and Reddit. But the book I'm reading is called The Last Cuentista by Donna Barba Iguera. Yes.
Ooh, the cover's really pretty.
It is. And I think that's what attracted me most because I saw this in my school library and I saw it and I read the back. I'm like, this is really cool. So I took a picture of it and I bought it at the Nowhere Bookshop.
You got to take me there.
It's so good. The Nowhere Bookshop, I love it.
You got to take me.
I will.
When I get paid again, because I just, I told you there was a sale at Target and I looked it up.
Yes. So anyways, The Last Cuentista, it's about a comet is about to destroy Earth. And I'm guessing the top scientists in the world and other important people are selected to go to another planet and basically avoid the catastrophic event of Earth being destroyed. And this girl, her family, I guess her mom and dad are scientists, so they get selected, and she of course has to leave her other family behind, like her grandmother. And her grandmother would always tell her stories or cuentos, kind of like Mexican folklore. So they go, and I'm guessing they're supposed to be in sleep mode for 300 and something years until they reach this planet.
Yeah.
I know, very scary. But what ends up happening is, I guess, when she's in her little sleep pod, something goes wrong. And when she wakes up, she's the only person who remembers what it was to be on Earth. She's the only one that remembers Earth. Because during the time that she's asleep, this group decides to take over the ship. I'm guessing
Cults.
I would kind of starts to take over a ship and want to form like this new kind of humanity where there's no war, there's no conflict, and like it's essentially erasing history from Earth so they could start over on the new planet.
But history is a way of repeating itself when you do things like that.
Exactly. And so it's just like her story of trying to escape that group, but also trying to keep her humanity, because she's the only one that remembers Earth. And it is a young adult novel, so she's 14 in this book, but it's really good. I'm almost done.
When you're done with it, I kind of want to read it now.
Yeah, it's very good.
I'm going to buy it because I am a hoarder of books. As you know, I hoard books until my mother steals them.
And I really like the aspect that, this is a Latina character, being central and focused, and all of the stories that she repeats or she tells are essentially stories from Mexican folklore or what her grandmother, she makes them her own, but it still has that aspect, history to it,
Ooh, I'm really going to read it.
Yeah, it's very good.
Add it to the rotation. I have a car drive coming up. It'll be worth it.
A car drive?
Yeah, I'll listen to it while I'm Audible.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
So that's what we're reading. If you guys want to tell us what you're reading in the comment section, we will post it on our Facebook page.
Are any recommendations on what we should read?
Yeah. We'll put a poll up. Not this coming month because we've already selected a book, but for the following month, we'll start putting up polls so people can pick.
Mm-hmm.
So now into book-related news. Dun, dun, dun.
So in this episode, we're going to dive into a topic that was circulating in the news recently. I'm pretty sure there are still aspects of it going around. But if you aren't in the know, the state of Florida has passed a law which mandates that public schools be free of pornography, or the books in public schools be free of pornography and suited to the students' needs. There's been a lot of discussion surrounding this issue. Most of the outspoken voices come from educators in the state of Florida and how it affects them in their classroom. And this topic is going to be about banned books. So
I'll give a couple of the examples of the books listed.
Yeah, well, the idea was I wanted to play a game like, is this book banned or is it not? But then I'm like, well, how would that work? I don't know. So there's some books on here I put that I'm guessing hopefully we know about, me and Mary, or maybe you've read in high school. I know some of these we've read in high school.
Yeah, I'm looking at the list and some of these are canon.
Yeah. And I think the one that stuck out to me the most, well, all of them do. But then I was looking at it. I'm like, well, these books were in our school library.
Mm-hmm.
Or they were given to us.
As part of the curriculum.
Yeah, as part of the curriculum. And then I'm trying to think, well, what about them? Why were they controversial to begin with?
Okay, we're going to pick one and then we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
The one that I know why it's controversial because it was obvi. Just like off going from the top to the bottom, The Kite Runner.
That's what I was thinking about too. And I know why that would kind of like reading the book, the content would be difficult for readers.
But I wasn't adversely affected by it when I read it.
For me, I know when I read that particular scene,
it was uncomfortable.
It was uncomfortable and I didn't want to read it. Like, because you don't expect it to come up.
Yeah.
And it was uncomfortable. And it kind of stuck with me after that. It was a good book.
Yeah, I think I chose to focus more on, to me, how dynamic the main character was, where his because when you read up to that point, I think most of the reading that I had done always had like a hero aspect to it. And I felt like this was the first time that you saw a very flawed main character for me.
Yeah, but also considering that the main character at that point was a young boy himself.
Yeah, but then for me, it was just like eye-opening to see anybody. Like I understood he was a child when it happened to him too. And how would I have reacted to it? I don't know. I think I probably feel just as guilty as he did. But how just how his relationship with that horrible thing that happened carried through his adulthood and how he dealt with it in like a full circle kind of moment that he had at the end that I think I just hadn't read a book like that before.
Yeah, I was I don't know. I was kind of wondering why we read that book in high school.
And it was weird. I don't know how your teacher did it, but ours just gave a quiz. It was summer reading.
I'm trying to remember when, what year. I don't know if it was sophomore. I don't think it was junior year because I had a different teacher. Senior year? No, it had to be sophomore year. With
the skinny white lady?
No. I don't know if you remember Miss Elizondo.
I didn't read it with Elizondo. I read it with the skinnier lady.
The artsy kind of.
Her.
Yeah.
I read it with her class. We barely had a discussion about it on the first couple of days, and then we did a quiz, and then we never talked about it again.
Yeah, I honestly don't remember how exactly it was taught when I read it. But
it was on the summer reading list for me.
Yeah. Other books here, I have 13 Reasons Why.
I never read that one.
I've read it because it was in the library. I'm like, ooh, let me read it. So I read it. And back then, you really don't think about those things, about a book glorifying unaliving oneself.
Yeah.
Glorifying that because it kind of almost has this revenge aspect to it. Because the tapes are released to uncover the truth from people who had affected the victim.
Yeah.
And I can understand why teens reading it would feel compelled to do something like that.
Yeah.
At the moment, I did not. But now, especially with the Netflix show, it's now I understand why it would be banned or be restricted.
I think with those kind of books that deal with those kind of topics, it's really a conversation parents should be having with their children.
It is.
But I also am very against censorship, so I'm kind of in this weird spot with it.
Yeah. Because I think with this whole thing of, banning books or vetting books in the school public library to see whether or not they're suitable for kids, a lot of the times when I'm looking at this or reading the news articles or looking at teachers' perspectives through TikTok, because, through TikTok, teachers were showing how they had to remove the books from their library that they've built in their own classroom, and a librarian, and I don't know who else, but someone other than the librarian that's certified to do that had to look through the books individually, and if they weren't approved by the state, they would be taken out. But when I was reading more into it, the content of these books is not necessarily harmful to children, in my opinion. I think it's more how people don't want to have uncomfortable conversations with their kids about certain topics.
Yeah.
Like racism, systemic racism, sexuality. Of course, when it comes to sexuality, a parent should be able to have that conversation with their child, but not just heterosexuality, but, anything that has LGBTQIA plus characters in it. Because
and in religion too.
And religion too. Because again, it's just one of those things where parents feel, I get that parents feel they should have these conversations with their kids, but they're not having these conversations with their kids. So when teachers are, having these books in their classroom or reading the books, the novels that deal with those issues, and parents get mad or frustrated that, well, I don't want my kid to be taught that. I guess for me, I don't want to feel like I'm enforcing views, but I also don't want kids to have this one perspective of what the real world is.
Yeah, and I think it does stimulate conversation with parents who want to have the conversation.
Yeah.
I remember when I was in high school, because this reminds me of the book Carrie.
Mm-hmm.
So when I first read Carrie, because I was on a Stephen King kick, I think I read I don't even know how many books of his that summer when I discovered his section at the library. But have you read Carrie before?
I have. I read it in high school.
There is a section, remember, where the mother is explaining to her about her period?
Yes.
And very religious, and it's very warped. Her version of the of why women get periods is very, very warped. And I remember when I read it, I was very heavily involved in church too. So I was wondering how they got to this perspective of it, or how people become like religious zealots and reword it this way. So I remember asking my mom about it, and she answered my questions, but then she was like, why are you asking me this? And I told her, well, like I read it in Carrie, and I showed her the passage in the book, and she was like, I don't think it's appropriate for someone your age to be reading this. I got it from the school library.
Yeah.
And it was a very small part of the book. It just piqued my interest. But the whole book had to be dismissed because one small section of it.
And because I'm looking back, and with my own students, we read at the beginning of the year a book called Ghost about this kid. He joins a track team, but he had a very rough childhood because his father's in jail for trying to kill him and his mom. And then he has a very rough upbringing. So with everything that's going on in Florida, and I'm pretty sure Texas is also trying to or wanting to do something similar to that, like this book would resonate a lot with the students I have, just because either they feel connected to the character or it resonates with them in some way. So like most of these books that are banned, they're usually by authors that are people of color or LGBTQIA plus authors. And there's really no merit as to why those books would be banned. Now, I understand if like the book is solely about,
something inappropriate. Like if you're not going to hand out 50 Shades of Grey to these kids.
50 Shades of Grey, like you wouldn't find that in a high school library. At least I hope not.
Yeah.
But there do need to be books that children should be exposed to because it gives them a different perspective about the world.
I agree with you, because for me, the one that kind of did that kind of challenging thing for me or made something feel more real to me was The Color Purple, which I noticed was also listed on here.
Yes. And it's also a movie, which is one of my favorites.
It's really good.
Yes.
And the book, when I read it the first time, I remember thinking how vulgar the book was, but it's not really vulgar. That's how they spoke during that period and in that environment. I never would have known that. I would have always considered it vulgar or like lowbrow kind of conversation if I hadn't done more research. It stimulated my own kind of conversation within myself to go and like do my own research and look into it. So maybe we could combat things like this if we teach children how to take what they've learned in a book and research it on their own and verify things for themselves and ask questions. And maybe there wouldn't be a need for censorship if we taught children how to be more analytical.
Exactly. Especially now, post-COVID, it's a high need for students to be analytical.
Yes.
I'm trying to think.
Was there any other book on here that stuck out to you? A Brave New World. That one was obvious as to why it's on the list.
And I also wanted to talk about The Handmaid's Tale.
Yes. The series on Netflix, on Hulu. It's on Hulu.
I read the book in high school and I stopped watching the series just because I felt like it was too much for me.
Yes.
So I stopped watching it. But I know I read the book, and the same teacher, the one we were talking about, the skinny.
I loved her.
Yes, I loved her too. She was very into reading. And I remember we did this project where we had to choose a dystopian novel, read it, and then write a paper on how...
I did Brave New World.
You did Brave. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you remember, right?
Mm-hmm.
On how the world could become something like that. And I chose The Handmaid's Tale. And now, like with everything that's happening in society,
we're not that far off.
Especially when it comes to women's own bodily autonomy. I'm like, I didn't think about that in high school because I was trying to research my best. I was focused more on the religious aspect of it.
Yeah.
But now it's starting to make sense why this book has an impact on society.
Yeah, the TV series was too much for me.
Yeah, I had to stop. I couldn't.
My stomach was upset. I was getting anxious because it's not too far-fetched for me.
Yeah, exactly.
So that one definitely. Bless Me Ultima. Another classic.
And I'm trying to figure out why that one.
I can't. Because it was such a good historical,
especially when
powerful novel. I don't understand why it's on here. My mom saw that I was reading it and she read it and she loved it too.
Yeah. And I think particularly with us, when we grew up in that Latino household, the talk of witches or brujeria or curanderos.
None of it seems off-putting or weird.
It didn't seem off-putting. So I really enjoyed that book.
And I like that it was canon even here in Texas where there's so many of us in our school system. I connected with that book. I really liked it.
Yeah.
The things they carried. Oh, I loved that book.
So did I.
And I know why it's on here, but I think it gives students a more, because when we read about war in textbooks where it's war, it's nothing tangible to us. It's nothing real. And I feel like that book made certain at the ugly side of, even if you're the winner, the ugly side of war.
And how a lot of the people who were in the Vietnam War were just drafted. Like they didn't have a choice unless,
Made me appreciate my grandpa more.
Yeah. Let's see. What else?
The Diary of Anne Frank.
Now, I heard the reason why that one is because she goes into detail about menstruating and her body changing, which is like, okay. I mean, you could also, maybe people were like, well, the Holocaust deniers, like that didn't happen. So maybe in that aspect, the historical aspect.
But is there really that many of them that they could make this kind of change? That scares me too.
I don't know.
That there's that many Holocaust deniers that are able to make this kind of change.
Necessarily Holocaust deniers.
Or the ones who just don't want to teach it.
Exactly. The ones who believe that, it really...
Schindler's List fucked me up.
The book or the movie?
The movie. I haven't even messed with the book because I saw the movie in school. I could not even mess with the book. I was thinking about it, but I was like, I don't know if I can handle it.
Yeah, I think...
My imagination gets a little too vivid. I told you I scared the shit out of myself with Stephen King novels. So what's the history behind this banning book?
Well, I mean, book banning is nothing new. It has been around for much longer than the U.S. was a country. Yeah,
I was thinking, the first thing that comes to my mind is the Inquisition, where they were burning other religious.
I didn't even think of that.
I'm sorry, my mind went there. Like,
no,
this is the first time I can remember a significant moment in history where they were banning books.
Yeah, because I was trying to. I mean, there are a lot of moments in history where there were book bannings, and there's just a lot. And I kind of wanted to focus more on the U.S. and the history of banning books in this country.
We're a young country.
Yeah, we're a young country, but I don't know where I should start.
Well, what happened in Massachusetts? I like that first one.
You like that first one?
Yeah, just start from the top and then we'll go down.
Didn't know if it would be interesting enough. But anyways, in 1637, of course, way before America won its independence, in Quincy, Massachusetts, someone named Thomas Morton published his New English, is it Canon?
Canon? Canon? I don't know.
I'm just going to say Canaan. It's from the Bible. I don't know.
Someone can correct us in the comments.
Yeah, go ahead. Which was subsequently banned by the Puritan government as it was considered a harsh and heretical critique of Puritan customs and power structures.
So he spit some truth bombs and it upset people.
Well, most likely, especially about puritanical culture.
Yeah.
And, back then it was either you believed in God or you didn't and you were considered a heretic.
Yeah. I still think that kind of carries true now with some of the reasons why some of those books were probably being taken off the shelves because they don't agree with their religious values. And I can understand them censoring them from their own children if they feel the need to do so. But
in a public school, I understand a private school, but public where state and church are supposed to be separated. I mean, I could go on about it because Texas wants to pass a law where you post the 10 Commandments in your classroom.
Oh my God.
Exactly my thoughts.
Yeah, very isolating.
But it's like separation of church and state. That's why there's private schools. That's why parents could send their kids to a private religious school if they wanted to.
Yep. This has been going on since 1637.
In Massachusetts.
What? The breeding ground of censorship. We're just playing.
Yeah.
Anyways. We love you, Massachusetts.
During the Civil War, or I think before, but Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe, that was actually the first book in the U.S. to be banned on a nationwide scale by the Confederacy, mainly for its pro-abolitionist agenda and debates about slavery. Because I guess at that point, no one has really contested in literature that slavery is bad. And that's why some historians believe that this book was actually a catalyst for the Civil War.
Well, I don't remember where, I think it was maybe Frederick Douglass's autobiography, where he was talking about how they were intentionally keeping the slaves ignorant by not giving them access to proper schooling or books and things like that in order to keep them, submissive.
Yeah.
And I think that shift that was happening between our country, definitely this was a catalyst of it, because it was now that they're being given a platform, it's an even bigger threat to their way of life.
Yeah.
And I think that just calls into, I think that we should remember that when we're thinking about banning books now, what we're doing. We're basically making our children have a more naive viewpoint of themselves and the world around them by taking out information from them and making them, putting them in a situation where in the future they could become someone submissive to somebody else who did potentially read those books or has a bigger mind view.
True. But I guess that's also why there's a lot of this whitewashing of history. Because, of course, no one wants to admit that maybe their ancestors were perpetrating these kind of acts, horrible acts on other people, which, of course, no one wants to admit to or take responsibility for, but it did happen.
Yeah.
And it should be taught, or at least given to children so they could learn it.
Yeah. Have you read Uncle Tom's Cabin?
I haven't.
I've read excerpts in our school textbooks, but I never actually read the book. We should add it to the list.
Well, I don't know, because a lot of our textbooks here said that the Civil War was about states' rights, not slavery.
I know. I've heard some of the... Some textbooks claim that it wasn't necessarily predominantly about slavery, that we choose to focus on it, but that was a smaller issue as opposed to the bigger issues that they were having. And I'm like, no, because when you think about it, you were telling these people who were using free labor, because it was essentially free because they weren't paying them. And now you're coming at their livelihood with this new change in idea that they didn't want to shift to. And when you're coming after someone's money, that's the biggest reason to go to war with somebody.
Yeah.
So we'll leave that for another discussion.
Anyways, a decade after the Civil War, a government official named Anthony Comstock convinced the U.S. Congress to pass a law prohibiting the mailing of pornographic material. And this included anatomy textbooks, doctor pamphlets about reproduction, anything written about Oscar Wilde. And if you know, he was part of the LGBTQIA plus community. And even the Canterbury Tales, I don't know if you've read that one.
Yes.
Because they were deemed too sexy to send through the mail. I think what's funny to me about this is like anatomy textbooks.
I know.
And doctor's pamphlets. And I think because when I was researching it, it's because they talked a lot about female birth control. So
let's keep the women ignorant so that they don't know any better and can be taken advantage by people later.
Or the reproductive system of males and females. But still, I don't know how that would be considered pornographic. But you know what we're talking about?
People who have dirty minds who can't understand.
Yeah, this is the late 1800s.
Yeah, I think we make it more than what it really is. To be honest, I think that we put that on everything through our own worldview. I think that there's something to be said by like the people who say like, well, if you put you let their kids wear any kind of like lip gloss when they're in elementary school, you're making them look like a woman of lesser morals. And if that's what you're putting on a 6-year-old, what's wrong with you? Like, it's lip gloss.
Yeah.
So that's my little, if they're going to make it seem so sexual, what the hell is wrong with you that the Canterbury Tales is considered sexy?
I don't know.
I don't go to a sex shop and see a section dedicated to the Canterbury Tales.
Yeah.
That was funny.
Let's see. I'm trying to find what we talked about. And of course, immorality.
I'm out of wine.
You want more?
I don't know what this brand is.
It's called Ménage à Trois.
It's so good.
Hot pink sweet rosé blend. I know, it's my favorite.
Des and I have been wanting to bring in more rosés because we're getting sick of Moscato.
I'm not a fan of rosé by itself because it feels too floral and dry for me. But I like this one. Well, I guess we could talk about...
We're going to do the discussion questions?
Oh, yeah. Because I was trying to find more historical stuff, but I probably should have done that before, but whatever.
Now I can segue into it.
Okay.
Now that you've given us some good food for thought, let's get into some discussion questions. The first one on the list. Are there valid reasons to ban books?
I think if the book is clearly made for adults, like erotic books, or even books that have gratuitous violence, like, I don't know.
I understand, but I do remember reading a lot of sexually charged books in high school. For instance, Flowers in the Attic had a incest scene in it. Granted, the whole book wasn't about it, but it kind of like led up to it, obviously. I also read Interview with a Vampire in high school, which is pretty raunchy in some sections of that book. I think, did they adversely affect me? No. But I think parents should still be allowed to choose to a certain extent what kind of books their kids are being exposed to.
Yeah.
Because my mom had no idea what I was reading.
Well, and that also goes back to like parents being, I guess, involved with the child's education, right? Because of course, all teachers want parent involvement, but involved because we want parent involvement, but we also don't want parents to choose what we teach in the classroom.
So I agree with you. So I think that there is a literary canon for a reason to help educators pick books that are appropriate and will still teach relevant content. The library is strictly fun reading for students.
Yeah.
However, I was the only nerd that I remember being, other than like a small group of us that were consistently in the library.
Oh, I was in the
books.
library every lunch period in senior year.
I was in there every day before school started. I would go and pick out books and stuff and sit in corners. But there wasn't a lot of, it's not like people were clamoring to get into the library. So how big of an issue is it really?
I guess if enough parents find out that this author is writing a book about two gay lovers and they're like, oh, I don't want my child to be exposed to that kind of nonsense, without even knowing what the actual book is about. And a lot of it has to do, well, we don't want our child to be exposed to different sexual preferences. But when you're reading a book about a straight couple and a guy mentions his wife, you're already putting someone's sexuality out there, that they are
attracted to women
or attracted to men, the opposite sex. So why is it different when someone's attracted to the same sex?
I agree with you. I think as long as there's not like a really raunchy, over the top sex scene.
Yeah.
And it's just in the context of the story, it's being referenced. I don't see what the big deal is. And especially when you're getting to a point where they're even able to read those books, they're probably at a high school level by then and had some kind of exposure.
And if you think that books are the only way they're getting exposed to this kind of stuff, then clearly you haven't been on the internet.
Or even their friends.
Or even their friends, or what the type of media that they're consuming.
It's so commonplace now to see these kind of relationships in a way more overt way than you would in some books.
Mm-hmm.
You see it on TV.
And how do you feel about the idea of censorship in general? Do you think there are cases where it's necessary or justified?
Nope.
No?
No. I don't believe in censorship at all. I think that parents have the right to decide what their children are exposed to and when. That I agree with. Does that necessarily mean that their beliefs in their household get to invalidate someone else in another household? No. But they can have those conversations with their children. They can go through their backpacks and see what books are in there. They can have those kind of conversations within their own household. I don't think that their household gets to extend into my household.
Exactly. And I think we as a country love to uphold the First Amendment, right? The freedom of speech. So that kind of contradicts the First Amendment, because then we're censoring someone else's words, either because we don't believe it or we don't like it, or we believe it's inappropriate for kids, or it's just something society doesn't need. Right?
Right. I agree with you. I think that it's a very slippery slope when you start to censor anything. You start to have issues with that. And I always say, like what I said at the beginning, history has a tendency to repeat itself. This issue with censorship has been going on for the beginning of time. And has it done anything when you censored anything in the past? No, because it comes back in a different form. So why not educate people to be more critical, analytical thinkers who think for themselves and don't just go off of what they read? Because it's not just books. You can go through your own Facebook feeds and see articles that are just completely fabricated, or like opinion pieces that are being taken as factual.
Yeah.
And where's the uprising and the call for us to help our children be more critical thinkers?
Yeah, I agree. Because it is hard to teach, especially right now, children how to think critically. Because then,
and how to separate fact from opinion.
Yeah. And it's very difficult. I will say that. It's very difficult, especially when kids are exposed to certain things. And I don't want to blame COVID for it, like after, but teaching is, or this new group of students are different to teach. So I do believe it's very important that critical thinking skills, analytical skills, it's vital right now.
Or to show children the importance of it.
Yeah.
Because I think especially during COVID, because all our information was being filtered through internet and social media outlets.
Yeah. And then when you have a whole group of students who went a year and a half behind a screen getting their education through Zoom, you don't have that way to teach them when you're reading something, this is what you should be looking for. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know the teachers did their best during that time, but it was difficult.
Yeah, to have that special connection with students on an individual basis.
Not only that, but having parents being involved at that time to say, your education's important right now. Like, we may be inside, we may not able to communicate face to face with other people, but to be involved with education at that critical moment. And a lot of parents didn't. They weren't.
Yeah.
So how could we teach these kids how to be critical, analytical thinkers when they're so behind right now?
Yeah. And I think that you can say that, I'm not trying to be like crass or anything, but people who are in minorities, low-income families.
Yeah.
That was a very scary time.
And I'm not negating that was an issue too, because during COVID, it did affect a lot of people, especially kids.
But I think it highlighted issues that are already there. Because these parents were having issues before COVID happened. And then when you go into COVID, where you have to kind of work hand in hand with educators to make sure the work is being done and being done to its highest potential, because you can't be there to be the enforcer. The parent has to kind of step up and do that portion of it. And if they're not doing that because they never did it in the past, you're putting your kids even more behind, because education, we're part of that group. Education was only pushed in some of our houses, not all of them. And it's not really seen as something so in my household, it was always the expectation that we would get a degree. It was never touted that it was okay to do the trade schools. In fact, if I had done a trade school, I would have disappointed my mother, because she was always about achieving the highest levels of education for all of her kids. It was never, maybe one of my brothers wasn't as a school nerd as hard. The expectation was he was still going to go to college. But I also know there's other family members that I know personally who don't have that kind of push with their kids, that college isn't the goal. Whether they want, like, the expectation isn't there. So the standard of how they view learning and textbooks and the importance of those kind of interactions, the discussions that have to do with the actual content isn't there.
I agree.
And I think COVID highlighted that.
It did. And then we're trying right now to pick up the pieces.
Mm-hmm. Because people were relying too much on the teachers to make those calls. Mm-hmm. I know during the summer, my mom would make us read 10 books. And she would go through and do questions to make sure that we read the books.
Yeah, my parents didn't do that with me. But I read books regardless. So it's like they were just happy I was reading.
No, my mom was on it.
Yeah.
She was on some shit. But I think it shows just like there's different mentalities all over like the place, and they all play effect of when something like COVID happens, where half of the learning is going to have to take place outside the classroom. Mm-hmm. So I'll go with the next one.
Okay.
How do you think we can promote greater awareness of banned books and the importance of free expression and intellectual freedom?
Well, I think what's very neat is that we have Banned Book Week at our school. Aww. Well, actually, no, because I think it's in October. I don't know what organization made it, but it's Banned Book Week, and the students, they would go to the library, and the librarian, she will have books, and she would say, why do you think these books are up here? What do you think they have in common? And of course, it'll be like Harry Potter.
Damn, Harry.
The witchcraft.
The culandera.
I know,
the
like
culandero, the OG. The OG. Dumbledore, what's up?
You got some ojo.
Right?
Let me rub the huevo on you.
Let him view your memories in the bowl. What was that bowl called? I can't remember.
It was, now you're going to try to make me think of it. It's on the tip of my tongue. But pensive.
Is that
right?
what it's called? I don't remember. I'm like drawing a total blank.
I'm pretty sure it's a pensive.
We got to get our book puns on point here.
Pensive, Harry Potter. Yes. A magical device used to store memories.
Yep. So you won't forget nothing, essay.
Yeah. But yeah, the librarian, she would have these books and she would discuss like these books, they're banned. It's banned book week and the importance of why we need to be able to be exposed to these types of books.
Yeah.
And that we cannot let a few people who disagree or don't necessarily believe in something like that to make that decision for the whole population.
You know what I think would be a really cool activity for kids to do? I just came up with it because I'm amazing. Have your English kids pick a book that was banned in a different part of the country off a list. They can look online. They have to Google.
They have to Google.
They'll read the book and they'll decide why it's so important to have kept this book in like the libraries and write a letter to a congressman in that area who had something to do with banning it and to send to them.
That does sound like a good idea.
Right?
I need to put that for next year.
Yeah, put it in your list.
I'll put it in my mind because I'm already thinking about what I'm trying to do next year.
Because I think that'll be a fun activity for them to like really think about how to make it personal as to why it's so important to keep these books available. Because I don't, as much as I said that like parents, if there's overtly sexual content and overly graphic content, those books still have a place here in our culture. It's just not necessarily at that time, but they shouldn't be taken off as an option altogether. I think within our own household, yes, if I saw something like if my daughter was in freshman year of high school and was walking around with 50 Shades of Grey, I'm taking that book. But until she gets like 18 or something, and then she can have the book back or whatever. But that's within my own household. I'm not going to go to the school and start to petition that they remove this book from the library. To me, that's someone else's problem if they have an issue with it. Just within my household, that's how it's going to be done.
Mm. Okay.
I paid bills. Puka was walking around.
Okay. Next question. What are some steps that individuals or communities can take to defend against book banning or censorship?
Vote.
Yeah.
Vote more appropriately because I don't think enough people vote.
Especially at the local level.
Mm-hmm. Like this our local election, there was a really low turnout. And I think that, and they tend to put very important things up for discussion during the midterm or the mid-range local elections because they don't want people voting. They know they won't turn out unless it's a presidential vote.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll try to sneak things in there. So people need to vote.
I agree. Vote, vote, vote.
Use your voices, people.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a person like my mother who's, psychotic and tells you to vote for her, she gives me an argument. Okay, I don't just go with whatever she says, but she'll tell me why she's going for so-and-so person.
Mm.
But then there'll be other things on the ballot where she's like, you can vote any way you want on that one.
Yeah. Let me see. How has the issue of book banning evolved over time? And do you think the current state of the debate is different from in the past?
I think we did a really good job of laying out how it's still happening. Like some of the issues, like religious, lifestyle. What was another one that we talked about?
Pornography or sex.
Yeah. Sexual orientation.
Yeah.
Or like to make another group submissive in some way or to
just
keep them ignorant.
Simple erasure of history.
Yeah. I think it's sad that in this day and age, we're still doing this shit.
Yeah. But,
This is America. I just play. What is it? Home of the free and home of the second chances.
Home of the free and home of the second. What was that from?
Pain and Gain. Mark Wahlberg when he was going to jail. He's a land of the free and home of the second chances. Okay, so the next question is, in your opinion, what are the risks and benefits of exposing children to controversial or challenging material through literature?
The risks?
I think a really good risk is if you don't teach your children to be analytical, that they're going to take ideas
and take it at face value.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because they're like what I said about Carrie. If I hadn't asked my mother about it, I think it really would have warped my view of religion to a certain extent as to seeing my period as punishment.
Oh, okay.
Because that's what I took from that passage of the book. My mom put it in context. This is being spoken from someone who's a religious zealot, is a fictional character, and they're meant to be a villain. So you don't need to make that the same thing as if my mother had told me that herself. You know, like there's a difference. It's strictly fiction in a fictional world. It does not need to be applied in my worldview. And yes, there is people who think like that, but that doesn't make it right.
Yeah, but I also think that goes back to, you know, parents having that conversation and not just dismissing that.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
I get, if my mother had dismissed me and not had the conversation with me at all.
Instead of saying, oh, well, why are you even reading this book? Like, you shouldn't be reading it.
Mm-hmm.
But she had that conversation with you.
And I think that that's definitely a risk is students don't have access to someone who they can have that conversation with, that they can take ideas or become radicalized in some way because they're not being taught analytical thinking or critical thinking. What do you think is a risk?
What do I think is a risk? I'm trying to think on the fly right now. I'm putting a lot of pressure on me.
I won't look at you.
Well, I mean, I would like to think of more benefits than risks.
Okay.
You know, because
I really think that's the only risk to me, because if you're having those conversations with your children, that's the worst. What's the worst that can happen is they ask you a question.
Or maybe like going back to 13 Reasons Why, I think the risk would be that students wouldn't, or like teens wouldn't have that capacity to think that this doing something to that extent to themselves is
glamorous or like
glamorous or just
or
like, you know, part of life.
I think they also, that kind of brings in our last episode where we talked about the Chanel Miller book and about how at her school there was those 4 suicides that were within like a 7-month period.
Yeah.
And that psychologists who reviewed the data and spoke to students all concluded that they needed to stop making memorials for the students because to a certain extent it was glamorizing it in the other students' minds. And I think that there is something to be said about, you know, making sure that the message we're sending or that we're leaving them with. So if they're going to read a book like 13 Reasons Why, there should be a critical conversation afterward as to what is the real point of it.
Yeah.
And not leave it so open-ended so kids can apply it in a glamorizing way.
And like know when to seek help. Because I feel like if they're already at a breaking, or not at a breaking point, but mentally not in the right space, reading something like that may be like, okay, well, it's okay to do something like this.
Yeah, triggering. There is definitely a mental health crisis in this country.
Mm-hmm. So I would think that would be a risk.
Yeah.
Like,
but all of these things can be negated with conversations with trusted individuals.
Mm-hmm. Or just that education that, at least with kids, to speak to someone if they're feeling negatively.
Yeah. So some of the benefits, I think, are stimulating that conversation to teach them to be analytical is the same thing that addressing those risks is the benefit of it, because you're having those conversations with your children in your home. And it's kind of like in a condensed way. They're not being exposed to it in a direct way. Like it's not happening to them personally. It's happening in a different fictional setting so that they can have a comfortable conversation with these kind of challenging issues and material.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
I love books.
So do I.
They teach you so much. And I think for me, after I read a book, I always spend time thinking, what can I take away from this story that I heard? Even fictional books.
Mm-hmm.
I'll always spend some time thinking about what I could take away from this. And I think that's an important thing that we should teach people when they're becoming more avid readers is after you read anything. Carrie, I learned stuff from Carrie. I did. I know I had like a whole conversation myself about not allowing myself to be influenced by other people's views to the point where I distort my own self. Because I think that's what really happened to Carrie, is that her whole view of herself was so distorted because she believed things that people were telling her that weren't true.
I see.
So I was like, I took that away from that book. Any book, you can find something to take from it, and it may not even have been the author's intent.
Yeah. Or maybe just finding some common ground or how you could apply it to yourself.
Yeah. Benefits, people.
Benefits. So what steps can parents take to stay informed about the books their children are reading and to be prepared to discuss any issues or concerns that may arise?
Be an avid reader yourself. If you see your kids reading something, read it.
I do agree, but I think especially when you have parents who are working 2-3 jobs or a single mother who's doing everything, reading is not going to be the priority for them.
And or maybe Google it.
Yeah. But I think there's also a certain trust, like if the teacher is assigning the reading, I'm going to trust the teacher.
Oh, yeah. Right? I think if it's canon reading, there's really no... To me, that those books are being held to a certain standard already. So I don't think that there's necessarily a conversation needed for those. But like any supplemental reading your kids are doing, I think it's important to educate yourself on.
Yeah. Or at least find out what the book is about.
Yeah. My mom would always ask me what I was reading, mostly for ideas for what she was going to read.
My parents never did.
I think it just depends on the household.
Yeah.
Because my mom was always a big book nerd, but no one else in my family reads to the same extent. And even now as an adult, my mom's kind of waned off of her
reading journey.
And I've always been the type of person who reads 3 or 4 books at a time.
Yeah, I'm not that type of person. One at a time, because that's all I could focus on. But
yeah, it is in the beginning when you're first trying to do the multiple reading. What I would do is I'd put a sticky note in the book where I left off, recapping for myself. But now I think I've been doing it for so long, it's like second nature. Like I don't think I could do it any other way. Okay, you did that one.
Yeah, I did that one. Please, Mary, don't repeat.
Okay, I'm so sorry. Okay, we already did that one. I think I repeated it. Okay, this is the one that I added.
Okay, well, which one?
Schools already censored the film students are allowed to watch. How is the book banning different? I just picked this one because I saw an article about it, and I was like, this is a good question.
Like what kind of films? Like not rated at their age? Because
yes,
I know
that movies are very clearly rated.
Yes.
But books are not. So do you think a rating system should be implemented?
Well, at the middle school level, I think there's already books that are, at least in the library, the school I work at, there's books that are already young adult, like for the kids to read. I don't think there should be a rating system for books. I don't know.
I'm trying to think about the books I was reading in middle school. I know the one that I read that is on a banned book list
Not
now.
unless like the books, because I know when the students are looking up books, they'll be tagged with like has profane language or something of that nature. Or when the librarian scans the book for the kid, she'll go, you do know this has like some language in it, or you do know that.
Oh, that's nice.
Is that okay with you? And of course the kids will be like, yeah, is that okay with your parent? Because you know your parent better than I do. And it's either yes or no. So,
well, maybe the parents could fill something out so the librarian, when they scan it, if it conflicts with something on that list, they need to get parental approval before they can check out the book. And like give them a slip with the name of the title and list what came up and let their parents kind of sign off on it, just to avoid censoring the whole library.
Yeah.
I think that could be something they could implement, because I remember when you and I were in school, they didn't give a fuck what the hell I was reading. In fact, she was recommending shit to me based on what I was reading. And I know if my mother knew some of the book's titles, like Interview with a Vampire, that Anne Rice also, there was a whole series. I read another one. I think it was Armand, the Antonio Banderas' character in the movie. He has his own book, and that one was a very sexual book. And if my mother had known I was reading it, I would not have been able to read it. So I think that in order to like avoid full-blown censorship, maybe there is little compromises that can be made.
Yeah. But also at that point, it does get the parent involved. It doesn't make it seem like the school is intentionally giving students these books that
are against their values or anything like that.
Because then you would need parent permission.
Yeah.
Because, I think that would make sense.
It would make sense to me just so that they would avoid having to take it to the extent where they're taking it from the shelf altogether.
Or even at the state level where it's like, these books cannot be in your classroom.
Because then there was other books that are on the list now that taught me something that was important. Like another one that they put on the list was Dear God, It's Margaret from Judy Blume. I read that one in middle school and I loved it because it was the teacher who had it, had her own in-classroom library. So I couldn't take the book with me. I could only read it during testing. And so I devoured it, obviously, because I knew I couldn't come back and take it. But the whole conversation about, the coming of age and putting it in the girl's perspective about what's happening to herself and trying to find herself out during that very awkward period for people or for women. I totally related to that book. I loved it. And I didn't feel so weird because I was the first one of my friends to get their period. So I felt like I was in this weird, I couldn't ask anybody about it because all my friends didn't have it yet. And in my household, no one was like, they gave me pads and like a purse and called it a day. And I think that that it was relatable to me. It made what was happening to my body relatable.
Okay. Any other last minute thoughts?
About censorship? Don't do it.
Don't do it. Okay.
I think we've made a good case.
Just vote, people.
Vote and don't do it. I think if you see some kind of censorship measures happening, look for a compromise so it's not being applied widespread. If you want to protect your children in your own home from something, you have every right to do so, but you don't have the right to tell someone else how to raise their child because it invalidates your argument.
Yeah, exactly.
So this was a really fun episode. And to end it, I think we should announce next month's book. What book are we doing next month? To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yay, one of my favorite books.
In honor of the banned books list, To Kill a Mockingbird was on it.
It was. And that's why I didn't talk about it, because I knew we were going to do the book.
And I'm so excited about it. It has a lot of very good themes in it. I love Atticus. He's my boy.
Now, should we also do Go Set a Watchman, which is like the sequel to Kill a Mockingbird? That's also very controversial because... Or no, just To Kill a Mockingbird.
I'll read both because I'm a psychotic person.
But we could read both and then our thoughts. I really didn't like Go Set a Watchman for obvious reasons.
I've never read it, so I'm excited.
Okay.
We'll compare and contrast the two books. You can read either one or both if you don't mind spoiler alerts. Because we're going to just talk about it. I'm not going to care if you read it or not.
Oh, you came and watched a movie with Gregory Peck. It's amazing.
Amazing. It needs to be, I'm pretty sure it's in some very important library to be preserved for all of time. It was one of his greatest performances. I think it was, when I think of Gregory Peck, that is the role that sticks out to me. Not that he didn't do other movies, Sabrina, another good one. But I think that role encompassed his acting ability at its highest level. So if anyone wants to watch it, I'm your girl. We can watch it together. I just saw the play. Incredible. If it's coming to a town near you, do it.
All right. Well, this was another amazing episode of Eat the Bookworm. Again, if you want to give us any recommendations or maybe...
And vote for the next book selection.
Or just like what we should talk about in relation to books, please let us know. We're always looking for topics.
Yes, we are nerds. So get weird with it.
Get weird. Get very weird.
So thanks for sitting with us and reading books. If you have any questions or you want to be a part of our conversation, we will have discussion questions about the books in our Facebook page.
Yes.
We'll be responding if your question is good. So thanks for listening. I'm Mary.
And I'm Abby.
We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye. And stay hungry.